10 Rillington Place hid a secret behind a kitchen wall. A single beam of light revealed the pale, bare back of a murdered woman. This discovery was about to change British justice forever. In the spring of 1953, the dreary streets of post-war London hid secrets behind every soot-stained brick. But no secret was darker than the one waiting inside the ground floor flat of 10 Rillington Place, a decaying terrace house that was about to become the most infamous address in British history. The story begins on a mundane Friday, March 20th. The ground floor tenant, a quietly respectable, soft-spoken man named John Christie, was finally moving out. Before he left, Christie pulled off one last petty scam, fraudulently subletting the flat to a young couple, the Rileys, and pocketing exactly £7 and 13 shillings. The landlord quickly discovered the deception and immediately evicted the couple. They had no idea just how lucky they were to be kicked out so quickly, because as the flat sat empty, something was waiting in the kitchen. Something that the polite, medical-minded John Christie had left behind. A secret carefully papered over, waiting in the dark for the next person to come along. With the ground floor apartment now completely vacant, the landlord made a fateful decision. He offered the upstairs tenant, a Jamaican immigrant named Beresford Brown, permission to use the empty downstairs kitchen. It was a simple, neighborly gesture that would ultimately unravel a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. What Beresford Brown was about to find inside that dreary little room wouldn't just launch a massive police investigation. It would completely shatter the British justice system, proving that the courts had made a fatal, irreversible mistake just a few years prior. We are going to walk through the exact moments of that terrifying afternoon, step by step, as an ordinary man attempting a simple bit of home repair accidentally unearths a monster's hidden tomb. This is where the mask of John Christie finally began to slip. 10 Rillington Place was not a glamorous building. It was dingy, damp, and desperately in need of repair. When Beresford Brown stepped into the ground floor kitchen on Tuesday afternoon, March 24th, he was immediately struck by the oppressive atmosphere. The wallpaper was peeling in sad, curling strips, and the air felt thick and heavy. But it wasn't just the usual smell of damp rot or old cooking grease. There was a distinct, sickly sweet odor lingering in the confined space. It was the kind of smell that clings to the back of your throat and makes your stomach churn instinctively. Brown tried to ignore it. After all, old London flats were notorious for strange, unpleasant smells. He hadn't come down here to investigate the plumbing or complain about the air quality. He just wanted to put up a simple wooden bracket to hold his radio. He needed a solid place on the wall to drive a nail. Brown walked over to a small alcove in the kitchen, a space that looked like it might once have been a pantry or a wash cupboard. He raised his hand and began tapping his knuckles against the peeling wallpaper, listening for the dull thud of a wooden stud. Tap, tap, tap. But the sound that echoed back was undeniably hollow. Curiosity getting the better of him, he picked at a loose edge of the wallpaper and pulled. The paper tore away, revealing a makeshift wooden panel nailed into place to cover a dark hole in the wall. The sickly sweet smell suddenly bloomed, growing overwhelmingly strong. Brown reached for his torch and clicked it on, angling the beam into the blackness. The light flickered across the void, coming to rest on the pale, bare back of a woman. She was tucked into the alcove like a discarded mannequin. He wasn't looking at a wall anymore. He was looking at a tomb. Beresford Brown stood frozen, his chest tightening as the nauseating stench of decay filled his lungs. He reached for a flashlight, his fingers trembling as he clicked the switch. A narrow beam of yellow light cut through the darkness of the narrow gap behind the wooden panel. At first, he saw only a pale, smooth surface that looked almost like a mannequin. But as his eyes adjusted and the light moved, the horrifying reality snapped into focus. He was looking at the bare back of a dead woman. Brown stumbled backward, the flashlight clattering to the floor as he fled the kitchen in a blind panic. Within minutes, the Metropolitan Police had swarmed the quiet street of Notting Hill. Uniformed officers and seasoned detectives crowded into the tiny, foul-smelling room, staring in disbelief at the makeshift tomb. They did not know it yet, but this single discovery was just the beginning of a much larger, darker secret hidden within the house. As the detectives secured the kitchen, a chilling sense of déjà vu washed over the veteran officers on the scene. This was not the first time they had been called to 10 Rillington Place to pull bodies from the shadows. Just 3 years earlier, in 1949, the bodies of Beryl Evans and her infant daughter, Geraldine, had been discovered in the outdoor washhouse of this very same property. Beryl's husband, a young Welshman named Timothy Evans, was charged with the crime. Despite his confused and desperate claims of innocence, he was found guilty and hanged at Pentonville Prison in 1950. If you want to dive deeper into the darkest corners of true crime history with me, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. The story of Timothy Evans was about to be violently reopened, and the truth of what really happened in this house was far more terrifying than anyone ever imagined. Back in the ground floor kitchen, the investigation took an even more gruesome turn. Police brought in heavy tools to pry the wooden barricade completely away from the wall. As the panels splintered and fell, the true scale of the horror was laid bare. Beresford Brown had not just found a single victim. Hidden inside that cramped, suffocating alcove were the bodies of 3 different women. They were stacked one on top of the other, carefully wrapped in blankets, and hidden behind a thin layer of cheap, peeling wallpaper. The sickly sweet smell of death was now entirely overpowering, forcing even the most hardened detectives to step outside into the cold London air just to breathe. These women had not just died here. They had been methodically entombed by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate the architecture of the old house. Someone who had lived there comfortably, sleeping just a few feet away from a literal burial ground. The terrifying question for the police instantly became, who had the time and the privacy to construct a hidden tomb in a shared house? The answer was agonizingly obvious. It was the man who had vacated the ground floor apartment just 4 days earlier. His name was John Christie. The revelation sent a shockwave of panic through the department because Christie was not just a random suspect. He was a former special constable who had served as a reserve police officer during the war. He was a man people trusted, a quiet neighbor who often offered medical advice and projected an aura of calm authority. He even spoke in a soft, barely audible whisper, claiming his voice had been damaged by mustard gas in the trenches. I am curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the police were blinded by his status as a former officer? It is a haunting reminder of how easily a predator can hide behind a badge. The horror of Christie's identity went far deeper than his polite demeanor. As investigators stared at the 3 bodies pulled from his kitchen wall, they were forced to confront a devastating fact that threatened to shatter the public's faith in the law. During the trial of Timothy Evans 3 years prior, the prosecution's star witness had been none other than John Christie himself. Christie had stood in the witness box, calm and collected, offering the damning testimony that sent an innocent, terrified man to the gallows. From the very beginning, Evans had screamed that Christie was the real killer, claiming that his neighbor had offered to perform a medical procedure on his wife. But no one believed an illiterate, confused laborer over the articulate, respectable former police officer. The realization was clear. The justice system had not only failed an innocent man, it had actively protected a serial killer while he continued his work. A massive nationwide manhunt was instantly launched as John Christie's face was plastered across every newspaper in Britain. The man who had hidden in plain sight for years was finally on the run, but the question remained, How had he managed to evade suspicion for so long? Christie had weaponized his respectability. He used his superficial medical knowledge to lure vulnerable women, offering them treatments for various ailments before incapacitating them with carbon monoxide gas. Once they were unconscious, he would strangle them and quietly entomb them in the walls or under the floorboards of his home. He sat in his living room, reading the paper and drank tea in his kitchen, all while surrounded by the decaying evidence of his monstrous crimes. The sheer psychological detachment required to live in a graveyard of your own making is staggering. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the conclusion of this investigation. The tension gripped London as citizens realized a predator was loose. The psychological weight of the Rillington Place murders is deeply unsettling because it forces us to confront a terrifying reality. Evil does not always present itself as a monster lurking in the shadows. Sometimes it looks like a helpful neighbor or a soft-spoken gentleman offering a warm cup of tea and a bit of medical advice. John Christie understood the unspoken rules of trust and exploited them with cold precision. He knew that people naturally defer to authority and calm voices, especially when paired with an outward display of respectability. He used the prejudices of post-war London to his advantage, correctly guessing that the courts would trust an articulate, former police officer over a poor, uneducated laborer from Wales. The bodies found hidden within the kitchen wall were grim proof of one man's depravity, yet they also exposed a society's massive blind spots. For years, tenants had moved in and out of the upstairs flats, walking past Christie's door while completely oblivious to the slaughter happening inches away. They had smelled the strange, sickly odors and accepted his casual excuses about dampness or bad drains. The true horror is that he did not even have to try that hard to hide his madness. The world simply chose not to see it. Christie's time on the run was short. He was recognized by a police officer near Putney Bridge just a week after the bodies were discovered. He looked disheveled and was completely out of money. Eventually, he confessed to murdering 7 women, including his own wife, Ethel, whose body he had hidden beneath the floorboards of the front room. In July of 1953, John Christie was executed by Albert Pierrepoint, the very same hangman who had taken the life of Timothy Evans. The sheer public outrage over Evans' wrongful conviction became a massive catalyst for the eventual abolition of the death penalty in the United Kingdom. While Evans was eventually granted a posthumous royal pardon, it was a tragically hollow victory that came far too late. 10 Rillington Place became such a symbol of pure evil that the street was renamed, and the house itself was eventually demolished to erase its memory from the city. The story of the bodies behind the wall at Rillington Place remains one of the most chilling chapters in criminal history. It serves as a grim reminder that the most dangerous predators do not always lurk in dark, lonely alleys. Often, they live right next door, hiding behind polite smiles and neighborly gestures. If this deep dive into the darkness of human nature kept you captivated, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss our next investigation. The truth is often stranger than fiction. Until next time, stay safe and always trust your instincts.